Welcome y bienvenidos to the Cultural Capacity Podcast, an Educator Aid Incorporated sponsored learning tool. I'm your host and guide, Justine Gonzalez, and here on the Cultural Capacity Podcast, we are committed to exploring and supporting individuals and organizations on their journey of self-aware leadership, emotional wellness, and development of effective cross-cultural communications. Be sure that you check out each of the show's episode notes, where every time we're sharing free learning resources and tools, as well as text recommendations, workshops, trainings, and also featured guests in our monthly extended episodes where we feature thought leaders, both existing and emerging, across these realms of topics that we explore together. The design of our episodes like this one you're about to hear is where we typically spend around 15 minutes diving deep with one specific question. This is intentional by design, so be sure that you tune in throughout the whole episode. Tap into the show notes to explore and examine both the free and paid resources for you and your teams, the organizations you serve in. And be sure to hit follow, subscribe, or share when you find value and feel led to share with others. I'm so glad that I'm here with you. I'm so glad, most of all, that you showed up for yourself today. Let's dive in together and let's continue to live out our lives in a compassionately curious way that brings out the best in not only ourselves, but in those we interact with every day. Welcome y bienvenidos to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I am your hostess for this episode, Justine Gonzalez. Let's get into it. Today, I want to talk a little bit about empathy and perceptions. However, you will notice, and I'm going to be doing a series here on some core attributes of anybody's personality structure. I am finding more and more as I work with clients that many leaders, including in the C-suite, it has been decades or never when I ask the question, when was the last time you engaged in some type of a 360-degree leadership inventory of some sort that tells you more about who you are as a leader? There's so many tools out there, and they can run all the way from free and basic online up to very expensive tools that really unpack your psyche, your distress patterns, and also affordable tools, some of which I offer. So we have some more coming with that, especially in the new year of 2024. So if you're listening, you're going to want to hit subscribe now, whether you are streaming on your favorite podcast platform, including Apple, Audible, Spotify, all the different platforms. We're on there, just audio only. And or over here on YouTube, you're going to want to also hit subscribe. We do put a lot of great free workshops and have many more coming only on our YouTube channel. That's where you're going to get the most free content. So we do ask you to subscribe here because you're going to get the whole gamut of all types of content on our YouTube channel, not just the more focused, targeted 15-minute or less cultural capacity episodes like this, if you're listening on a podcast. So many cool things coming with our team in 2024. I'm so excited to share with you all. Great interviews lined up for our featured voices. However, during this month, I got to thinking, and I think I even said this on the last video that I put out here. And I know also my colleague and sister, Kara Gonzalez Howard, she put out a great episode recently. So if you haven't caught up, make sure that you are listening to those past episodes, but know that we go off of the feedback you offer. And our Spotify Wrapped, our data just came out for 2023. And not only have we expanded and been streamed in over 30 countries, we also have a lot of response to any of our episodes about communication. So because this is such a powerful layer that you all have responded to, all of the episodes this month are going to revolve around Communication. I was leaning towards what I was alluding to, and I think in one of the last episodes I did for cultural capacity, I talked about I was feeling led to maybe do something specifically about anxiety. That is what it was. Go back and watch the episode on how do I manage anxiety if that speaks to you. And as I started thinking some more, I thought, before we even dive into anxiety, do most of us even know, what really sets you off to be anxious? Do we even know ourselves deep enough? And so that's where I'm bringing us full circle here to today's topic of really understanding how amazing each of us are on 6 different levels. There's a reason there's 6 different levels. Every personality structure and every person's personality structure is formulated in them by the time they're 8 years old. That is dictated and predicated not only on DNA, but also environmental factors, your experiences as a child, developmentally. There's a lot of ties between how we respond, how we communicate emotion, and how we actually bring ourselves to what's called plus plus or okay, right? Plus plus in a conversation means that you're okay, I'm okay. If one of us is in distress, that means a prolonged stress or something that has worked us up in that moment. Communication doesn't happen. And I will say that even amidst all of the custom cultural inventories, different research tools that I use with organizations through our company, Educator Aid, it's still the most prevalent thing that I get feedback on from people about their organizations is communication. Beyond that, though, there are so many facets to how we communicate, when we communicate, why we communicate, and what is actually the message that we're sending with the communication. So when I say message, I don't mean email message and I don't mean text message. I don't mean the modality. I mean what is being said, and is that being received in the way that you intend it to be by the receiving party. And often communication doesn't happen because we don't understand our personality. I am a person who I am devoted my life to understanding culture and communication because they were so ambiguous, big things for me growing up that as a third culture kid, and my mother's background was Amish Mennonite heritage, father Puerto Rican, sprinkle in a healthy dose of hillbilly and some other things. If you've listened to my episodes, you know that I have a large representation of blood from multiple continents, including Indigenous America, in South America, North America, and also Taino, which is native to the Caribbean. So there's a lot of things floating out there as far as even from a genealogy standpoint and how we are programmed to communicate. But all of that to say, when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of tools for how to express myself. And I realized over time, especially going into education, especially being first generation college student, how important that really was. I think a lot of my childhood, because I myself was trying to figure out, well, where do I fit in? And most of us, we might be pursuing that. And the reality is, and I'm just going to tell us all this, you're not meant to fit in anywhere. I don't think anybody should be striving to fit in to some box. I think we should be striving to understand ourselves, not meet up to an expectation that an employer or a spouse or a friend or a family member has of us. But it's our job to actually really deeply understand what makes us tick and what ticks us off. Understanding our personality structure and the fact that we all have 6 different energies, so to speak, that we can travel to, and we all have those energies within us. It is not a definitive look at you have to always communicate this way because this is your personality. That was a frustration I had over the years, being a person who would go online and do Enneagram, or if you ever visited 16 Personalities, it's a Myers-Briggs based one. Like, I love those. Those have been powerful steps in my journey. And I still didn't have a lot of tools for knowing what to do when I was worked up or when I myself was experiencing some type of distress, and not maybe understanding, well, why isn't my message getting across? So if you're a person who has struggled with anything that I'm saying, you might want to listen into the rest of this episode or bookmark it if you need to come back to it. But I do want to kick off by first giving us a common definition of empathy, which is really the ability to understand and appreciate the feelings of another person. I would take it even further and remind us that empathy comes from, I believe, a Latin or Greek root, and pathos, which is really to be impassioned and get passionate about or for someone or something. So I would contend that until we really know ourselves, how can we understand and try to even relate to another person and how they feel, unless we understand how we respond in different situations, right? Where there is empathy or maybe a lack of empathy. And so I would go on to add to that a current and more accurate definition of that typical of like appreciating someone's feelings or putting yourself in their shoes. We hear that a lot. It's not just appreciating feelings, because feelings are really how we attach meaning to an emotion we're experiencing and our reaction or response to it. But it's also how we try to relate to the experiences and perspectives of others. And in that sense, empathy is actually a foundation for connecting. Quite possibly two of the most important things besides feeling safe for humans is being seen and heard as the unique human being that I am. And so I want to share a quote from Nelson Mandela. And he said, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. Now, right away, when I hear that, right, I think of the love languages, another great window into pieces of who we are. So put in the comments if you've ever done these tools that I've mentioned so far, and be thinking back, okay, what were all the different things that I've done, and what have I learned about myself along the way? And further, how have you seen it applied and showing up not only in your professional world, but also your personal world, which is why I'm a huge advocate for a little system called, or model rather, called process communication model, which happens to be our most popular episode on this podcast. And so let me do a little have you ever to give you a little inventory. So if you're driving, you don't want to write this down, but if you're sitting stationary, you might want to write it down, bookmark it, etc. But here's my have you ever. Okay. Tell me in the comments, because I do want to know if you've ever experienced any of these things. Again, as long as you're not driving or just listening, I want to hear in the comments, have you ever taken a personality test and felt like the results put you in a box? Have you experienced labeling and stereotyping after going through training on personality differences? I made the mistake actually pretty recently. I don't know if it was a mistake or not. Let me not say that, but I was working with a director of curriculum instruction for a school district. And I said something to her in passing, like, yeah, it's okay. I mean, you want to know, and that's more of a type A thing. We tend to be this way, right? And I was saying it in an inclusive, well, I thought I was being inclusive because I tend to be a little more type A. I know many educators who are that way. And this person, actually, I could tell right away her whole body language shifted, and she took offense to that, because in her mind, type A meant you're controlling. So she perceived that like I was telling her she was controlling. And so we had a great conversation. It actually spurred on a great conversation with her superintendent involved, because he said, oh, I wouldn't have taken that as negative. It's like a really great thing for you as a leader in your role. So it's interesting. That's why that question, the have you ever question about have you experienced feeling like you were labeled, or then there's actually stereotyping in a training, like, oh, well, you must be this way because you got this personality type on the DISC assessment. And it kind of pigeonholes you. So let me know in the comments if that's been you. Have you ever experienced people becoming entitled and hiding behind their personality? So for example, let's go with DISC. Many people are familiar with the DISC assessment and say that your results revealed you were a D, which I believe stood for dominant, right? A more dominant personality. could that be then used to hide behind it and go, oh, well, I don't deal with those things because that's more for this type of person, right? So then we start to play these games. Okay, next, have you ever experienced trust problems with certain people? Oh my goodness, yes. Whole multitude of reasons for that. And for many of us, that does go back to childhood often. That is also why I like approaching anxiety and mental health issues that we all may or may not struggle with at times. But I like approaching these things because it's not one size fits all. And sometimes I know I have started to wonder, like, is this just a person I can't trust? And in those situations, a lot of times it was just that person was wearing what's called a mask. And we use that language often in the process communication model, which our company does trainings on and workshops. We also have some 360 surveys and stuff. But the biggest thing that I'm hitting on with that is we often go around thinking we can't trust people, and really it's just that we're communicating in different ways. And they are expecting something different because they're used to their way of communicating, kind of their go-to of the energy of a certain type of personality that maybe they lean more towards, and maybe you don't lean as much towards that type of energy. It's important to remember with this model, it's not limiting, because when I examine and I accept that I have all of these personality energies in me, then I can use what we call in our community the elevator. And I can decide, just like the Nelson Mandela quote that I read you all, I can decide if I'm going to speak to the head or the heart with somebody. Usually, if I hit both is the ideal. But we can't do that unless we learn a little bit more about ourselves and our own personality. Have you ever, there's two more, wondered if people were using their personality to play tricks? Oh, I've totally thought that before. And sometimes too, I go, well, maybe they are. Maybe they're just a trickster. I've definitely wondered that. You're not alone if you've wondered that. We often take and run with stories, I think, especially in the workplace, because I hear in trainings all the time, people talk about these things. We really create these narratives, especially perhaps to the people we report to, or our evaluators, or our boss, whatever lingo you use, but the person you report to typically, those are sometimes the people I think that we end up seeing, like, because we're questioning how they make decisions. And if they haven't communicated effectively, then yeah, that starts to build doubt, and we think we can't trust them, or we think, oh, well, they're just being tricky, or they're out to get me. And we create these narratives based on the filtering or the perception that we see the world. And it's not accurate. It's something we've told ourselves based on our perception. And finally, have you ever heard leaders talk about valuing all personality types, but not adapting their communication or leadership accordingly? I know I'm guilty of this. I know, even as a practitioner and researcher of communication and culture and personality, I'm going to tell you, I'm guilty of these things. And I definitely have experienced every single one of these things on my have you ever list that I'm going off of here. So I want to hear in the comments, and this is just kind of part one of this series. Make sure that you do leave comments if there's something specific you want to ask about personality structure, or you want me to talk and dive into the different personality types. That might be where we go next. I might hit on some of the different personality energies in this model, just because, again, that thorough overview episode was really one of our most listened to episodes really on this podcast for the past year and a half. So I want to make sure that we're really giving you all more of what you like, what you want, and what's really helpful to you. So one more have you ever. And this one might be really hard for some of you to hear, but I want you to ponder these. These are all good questions to start your journey of getting curious about your own personality. So I'll leave you with these three have you ever questions for personal self-reflection. And as always, I will tell on myself because, yeah, I've experienced all these things. So the first is this: have you ever been accused of not hearing, I'm using air quotes, hearing someone, even though you were listening. Yes, all the time. Unfortunately, this happens more times than not in closer relationships, at least what I personally experienced with my partner, with my family members. And we get the most frustrated, I think, with the people that we trust and love the most, because we expect more and we expect them to really understand us. And that's not always fair. It's not always fair because we're operating then off of a lot of assumptions, and that person might, that person can't be aware of something that they don't even know about themselves. That is why processes such as this, or inventory tools like the different ones I've named, that start to get you curious about learning about you and your communication patterns, your preferences, your perceptions, how you need to get your psychological needs met based on your unique personality structure. Because, oh, wait, it's a game changer when you know how. All of that matters. And many of us, including myself, who not only grew up in a very bicultural, dysfunctional at times home, you don't become an expert, even if you live it. Even if you live this constant, I don't fit in anywhere, or I'm navigating and code switching all the time, it doesn't matter. I can sit here and tell you that from literally my lived experiences since I was born. It's still something that we have to actively take initiative to really get curious about. Have you ever, second to last question, wished you could communicate so that more people would really understand what you are saying? Absolutely. I reflect on that all the time, even with this podcast, because I know the episodes where I might be out there, right? I'm speaking over here and you're inside my head, but have I really communicated in a way that makes sense to our audience, or to a lot of our audience? That is something I'm constantly thinking about. I'm thinking about it in workshops and trainings. And as I get into more of the public speaking realm, these are things that are very, very important to me personally. And if you are in any type of leadership role, or any role period, where you are interacting consistently with humans, these are questions that need to be considered, especially in today's day and age, the day and age when people like to hide behind a keyboard or a text message. I'm going to keep reminding us here on this podcast, around roughly 70 to 75% of written communication forms, it is misinterpreted towards the negative. So keep that in mind. I'm going to keep reiterating that. Final question: have you ever been told you lacked empathy? I don't think in our current times that anybody wants to be told that they lack empathy. I have been told this though, and I have also become aware of it myself in situations where I go, "Oh, we have very different experiences." And that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to demonize or bring down or cancel someone just because you speak in different ways, just because you see the world and experience the world in different ways, because that is over 8 billion people on this globe. That's a lot of perspectives, and I can only filter it through what I've seen, what I've lived in my own life. So it becomes even more important to just become aware of the things that we can know about ourselves, such as, how do I respond when I'm in distress? How do I need to meet my psychological needs based on my unique personality structure? So questions, put them in the comments, leave us a voice memo. If you're on, I think, Spotify and Apple, I think you can do that on different podcast platforms. Pretty sure our team has that set up now. But tell us in the comments, what do you want to hear more of? What questions came up for you? And what do you want more tools for? Let us know. Thanks for tuning into this episode. It's been a wonderful year here on the Cultural Capacity Podcast, and you can expect to have a couple more episodes specifically centered in the coming weeks on communication. I can't think of a better topic as we enter into more of just winter holiday season all across the globe. So no matter where you're at, all of our listeners all around the world, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you showed up for yourself today. And let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care. Thank you so much for showing up for yourself, first and foremost, and for sitting down to have a conversation with us in this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I'm your host, Justine Gonzalez, and I encourage you to first and foremost check out our website, educatoraid.com, as well as any of the linked resources in the resource section of our show notes. And finally, be sure you hit subscribe on your preferred platform. For podcast preference, we stream on Audible, Amazon Prime, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review when you're over there on those platforms. And then you can also click to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is also in the resource section of our show notes. The reason why you would want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, number one, it is where we stream and premiere all of our featured voices interviews, which also include video, especially if you want to see, hear, interact with, and feel like you are sitting down a part of the conversation. I would always recommend that modality. However, it's also the place where we're going to continuously be releasing free high-level learning workshops for you and your team. So you're going to want to hit subscribe to the Educator Aid Incorporated official YouTube channel, as well as check out all of the resources that we put in the resource section of the show notes. Again, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. Let's continue to get compassionately curious together.